Some places are haunted because people tell stories about them. Port Arthur is different. Port Arthur feels like the story never ended. Tonight, on True Haunt Lore, we're going to the Tasman Peninsula in Australia, to a prison built at the edge of the known world. In the 1800s, this was where the British Empire sent convicts it no longer knew how to punish. If you were already in Australia and you broke the rules again, they sent you here. The prison for prisoners. The end of the line. Escape was almost impossible. Port Arthur was surrounded by cold water, and the only land route out was Eaglehawk Neck, a narrow strip guarded by chained dogs and rumors of sharks. The message was simple: run, and you die. From 1830 to 1877, more than 1,000 people died here. But the real horror was what happened before death. At first, punishment meant axes, chains, whips, and hard labor until bodies failed. Then the authorities decided pain was not enough. They wanted silence. That is how the separate prison was born. Built in 1849, it was designed around the silent system. Prisoners were locked alone for 23 hours a day. No talking, no names, no footsteps. Even their shoes were padded so they could move without sound. Guards used hand signals. Corridors swallowed every breath. And when a prisoner was taken outside for exercise, he wore a hood over his head. Thick cloth, no face, just 2 small slits for the eyes. Imagine being alive, but erased. No one could hear you. No one could know you. No one could even see your face. You became a ghost before you died. And that is why the hauntings at Port Arthur are so disturbing, because people still see them. Night guides and visitors have reported figures standing in the separate prison corridors after dark. Men in old convict clothing, waiting in the gloom like orders, are still coming. But when witnesses look at their faces, there is nothing there. No eyes, no mouth, no expression. Just a smooth blur, or a dark, empty place where a human face should be. One guide in the early 1990s was locking the separate prison after the final tour. He had checked the cells. Every heavy wooden door was secured. The building was empty. Then the temperature dropped. Not a normal chill. A sudden cold pressing against his chest. He stopped in the corridor. At first, silence. Then came the sound. Soft shuffling. Not boots. Slippers. The same padded steps the convicts were forced to make in life. The guide lifted his flashlight towards C Wing. At the edge of the beam stood a man in beige prison clothing. He thought a tourist had stayed behind, so he called out. The figure stepped forward. The light hit its face. There wasn't one. The guide ran. When security came back with him, the corridor was empty. But one iron door at the end of the wing, a door he had personally locked, was standing wide open. And the separate prison has never truly been silent. Staff have reported screams coming from empty isolation cells. Not wind, not old timber. Human screams. The kind that sound like they are being dragged out of a man left too long in the dark. There is one cell people still avoid. Visitors who step inside say they feel pressure on their chest, then a violent shove, as if unseen hands are forcing them out. Others have walked out with red marks or scratches they cannot explain. Then, there is the smell. Security teams responding to alarms in the dead of night have found no intruders, no broken windows, no open doors. But in the still air, the same odor returns. Rot, stale tobacco, unwashed bodies. A smell that appears in sealed rooms and vanishes before anyone can prove it was there. Across the water sits the Isle of the Dead. More than 1,600 people were buried there. Officers and free settlers were laid at the high end under carved headstones. Convicts were buried lower down, in unmarked graves, sometimes stacked several coffins deep. Even in death, they were kept beneath the others. One winter, a ferry captain saw a figure walk to the edge of the island and step into the water. He thought a tourist had fallen in, but there was no splash. The figure kept walking across the surface, then dissolved into mist. Visitors say the island feels wrong the moment they step onto the jetty. A wave of sadness, nausea, pressure behind the eyes, like grief rising out of the soil. And in the parsonage, people still whisper about the lady in blue. In the late 1990s, journalists sleeping there heard a rocking chair moving across an empty room, then a woman humming like she was soothing a child. By morning, They learned they had been sleeping in the old nursery. That is what makes Port Arthur so hard to dismiss. The stories match the wounds. Faceless men in the prison, a grieving woman in the house, the silent dead on the island. Skeptics say Port Arthur is old. Wind moves through broken buildings. Wood shifts. Shadows trick the mind. And maybe sometimes that is true. But wind does not leave scratches. Old stone does not smell like rotting flesh and then suddenly smell clean again. And imagination does not explain why strangers, years apart, keep describing the same faceless men. Maybe the silent system worked too well. Maybe it erased those prisoners so completely that something stayed behind. Still hooded, still nameless, still walking. So picture this. The tour is over. Fog rolls in from the bay and wraps around the sandstone walls. Somewhere in the dark, a bell sounds, though the prison bell has not called men to order in more than a century. You are alone in the exercise yard. The walls are too high to see over. The sky is gray. The air is cold. Then you hear footsteps, soft, slow, shuffling across stone. They stop right in front of you. You cannot see anyone, but you can feel breath against your face. At Port Arthur, the doors are locked, but they do not stay closed. The faces were taken, but something is still watching. And when night falls over the Tasman Peninsula, maybe the dead are not looking for a way out. Maybe they are waiting for you. So, after unpacking the pure, psychological terror we just explored, the agonizing isolation of the separate prison, the 1,600 bodies buried on the Isle of the Dead, and the horrifying reality that the silent system erased men into faceless ghosts, you're probably wondering, what exactly is the vibe at Port Arthur today? Well, my personal take on this infamous Australian location right now is all about its deeply deceptive, scenic charm. If you drive down to the Tasman Peninsula today, expecting to find a dark, rotting, Hollywood-style wasteland, you will be completely caught off guard. During the daylight hours, this sprawling historic site actually possesses a remarkably serene and peaceful aesthetic. Set against the stunning blue waters of the bay, with its lush green lawns, beautiful English gardens, and majestic sandstone ruins, it feels incredibly cozy. Bathed in the warm sun, the property genuinely looks like a bright, picturesque Thomas Kinkade-style painting of a historic, peaceful coastal village. Today, it operates as a meticulously preserved open-air museum, filled with families and tourists enjoying a beautiful afternoon stroll. But honestly, from my perspective, that picture-perfect, welcoming exterior is exactly what makes the reality of Port Arthur so deeply unsettling. The contrast is just jarring, because while it looks like a serene coastal retreat by day, the terrifying reality of the silent system baked into those sandstone walls refuses to rest. You can be admiring the beautiful gardens in the sun, but the moment you step inside the separate prison where men were locked alone for 23 hours a day, or wander near the exercise yards where they were forced to wear thick hoods to erase their faces, that suffocating dread rushes right back in. The prisoners of Port Arthur haven't moved on. They are still walking those corridors, waiting in the gloom with a smooth blur where a human face should be. They are endlessly pacing in their padded slippers. Port Arthur proves that the most beautiful coastal ruins can still trap the souls of those forced into absolute silence. Thanks for joining me on this case here on True H. Hent Lore, and I'll catch you in the next mystery.